The overall theme is that we are at the end of an era, that globalization was a moment in time that the United States created artificially in order to generate alliance to fight the Cold War. And in the 8 elections since the Cold War ended, the American population has always gone with the candidate who was less globalist and more populist. That includes Biden. So we've been moving this way for a long time. It's not an aberration, it's a pattern. And without globalization, most of the major economies in the world have to, at a minimum, retool. And for many of them, that's the end of their systems. The other piece is depopulation. We've finally past the point where the problem is no longer overpopulation. The problem is that as globalization took hold, everyone everywhere was able to move off the farm and into the town. On the farm, kids are free labor, and in the town, they're really expensive annoyances. And adults aren't dumb, so they have fewer of them. You carry that out for 75 years, and you don't just run out of children, you run out of 20-somethings and 40-somethings. Most of the major countries of the world have now aged past the point of no return. And this was always going to be the decade where they moved into mass retirement. You play these things two together and the whole system starts to spin apart. The Ukraine war is a piece of that. Countries looking to attach themselves to a superior power is a piece of that. The evolution of China and Japan and Russia are pieces of that. And the whole point of the book is to show what happens on the backside in terms of the major economic sectors, whether it's transport or finance or agriculture. The one-child policy has been in place for 40 years, and that means that the Chinese are running out of 30-year-olds. That's just how math works. Anyone who suggests that the Chinese think long-term or are good at math really needs to take a closer look at their system. Also, with the more recent census data that has come out, they are now admitting grudgingly that they've overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people. Wow. Now, the Chinese system, as of 2 years ago, before this new census data had come out, they were already the fastest aging and fastest demographically collapsing country in human history. And now with the new data, it suggests that the Chinese population will be less than half of its current size as soon as 2050. So just from a demographic point of view, this is the last decade of China as a unified nation state. They're a dead man walking. Let's go beyond that. Okay, One Belt, One Road. This is an outcome of something the Chinese do with their financial system. So we give the Fed a lot of crap for monetizing and printing currency and all that good stuff. And on average, we do print a substantial amount. But the US dollar is used as the lubricant for the world's largest economy. We have another 20-odd currencies in the wider world that are linked to it. And it is the sole currency for international trade and the primary currency in terms of store of value. As such, the American increase in the money supply actually broadly correlates with those other factors combined. So do we play a little fast and loose with the rules? Sure. Will we pay for that down the road? Probably. But the Chinese, the Chinese yuan is neither the store of value nor the currency of exchange. And yet the Chinese in any given month print 2 to 5 times as much currency as we do. Their overall money supply is over twice what ours is, and it's not internationally exchanged at all. They use that money to lubricate their systems to force capital into any company that might be able to employ people. So for us, the money supply is primarily an economic issue. For them, it's a political one, and it's treated appropriately. And that means that the Chinese are brimming with huge volumes of liquidity. And if you're someone in the know in China and you have access to that, it's a gold mine, because if you can get that currency out and exchange it for something else, anything else, even if the price is ridiculous, that means you've gotten some capital flight out and you have your rainy day fund. That's exactly what One Belt, One Road is on a global basis. Whenever you see the Chinese bidding $8 billion for something that's only worth $2 billion, that is not a sign of national strength. That is a sign of a corrupt bureaucrat who is establishing his nest egg. And they've now done that on a global basis. Now, there's lots of other impacts from this over-financialization, this hyper-financialization system. But overall, it does mean that each individual Chinese company of size could not survive in the global environment unless that money keeps coming. Other countries have tried various versions of this. Japan probably is at the top of that list. They're the ones who kind of designed the model. But eventually, you have sufficient exposure that you can't compete. and you start going down a Japanese style economic malaise that in this case has lasted 30, 35 years already. And the Japanese economy today is about the same size that it was in 1994 before the decline really got going. That is the best case scenario for the future of China, a slow, long stagnation. But there's a lot of reasons to expect it to be a lot worse. Not everyone can reach everything. The United States should be pretty much okay because we're going to be combining the Western Hemisphere with maybe the Japanese and Southeast Asia. But for everyone else, you're looking at sharply truncated capacity to access the inputs that allow modern life to happen. So we're seeing some of this going on right now with the Ukraine war. There are a number of countries who are completely reliant on globalization to allow them to import energy. China's probably at the top of that list. And in a world where Russian crude is going offline bit by bit, that means the entire map of where crude can go is going to reshuffle. So it's probably going to look something like this. As the Russian crude falls offline, the Europeans, who are their primary customer, are going to go back and reinterface with countries closer to them that they have better relations with, primarily former colonies. That's North Africa and West Africa. There's enough there, plus Norway, to supply the Europeans. But that means that Russian crude is going offline and North and West African crude is going offline. That means there's not enough left to go to East Asia. Now, the Japanese have a navy. They can reach the Western Hemisphere, work with the Americans, still get supplies in. But China can't. China is a good example of a country that is absolutely screwed from this new sort of environment. They've mined most of their own country out, and the resources that they need from further abroad are concentrated in certain footprints that the Chinese can't reach. So China and a lot of countries in the broader world will not be able to access affordable and ample energy supplies to maintain their current system. And they also can't reach the cobalt and the nickel and the copper that is needed to maybe try their hand at the green transition. And in that sort of environment, you're not just looking at a trade breakdown in East Asia, and a population bust. You're looking at a loss of the inputs that are necessary to maintain today's economy, much less the future one. And that suggests a screaming reverse in economic activity and a deindustrialization of the system. That doesn't simply make the Chinese no longer rich. It puts the Chinese in an environment where they have to go back to subsistence rice paddy agriculture just to prevent their population from dying out. Some version of this is going to play out in large parts of the world. I'm specifically concerned with sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa and the Middle East, a little bit in South Asia, and absolutely in Central Europe.